We've been witnessing in recent days a worldwide frenzy against Israel, an obsession with the Jewish state that has replaced, in the words of Melanie Phillips, rationality with lethal propaganda. This is an image, as you can see here on the screen, of hundreds, close to 1,000 trucks of aid that Israel allowed in to Gaza just recently, and that the UN is not delivering. Hamas, as we well know, loots aid, and Israel is not the one that is stopping it being delivered. It is the people that control operations in Gaza that are causing these issues. But of course, the media and the political international community don't say this, and they put the blame at Israel's door. And I want to talk to you about this because I'm noticing a trend here that it's something that I've noticed actually at the back of my mind for the past few months now. Because prior to the success in Operation Rising Lion, railing back Iran's nuclear program, the Hezbollah pager operation, getting key Hamas leaders in other countries, prior to all of that, there was a big question mark around Israel's escalatory dominance, intelligence edge, and now they have shown such military strength. But it looks like, and this is what I'm referring to, something I've been thinking about for the past few months, a new battle is coming. And this may be the one that is going to be longer and potentially harsher, which is actually not even primarily with the Arab nations militarily, but in the sphere of international political discourse and sanctions and pressure. Hatred, I think, to Israel from the West, attempted isolation of Israel from the West, I see coming down the tracks. Ironically, because we all thought this was a war primarily between Israel and the Arab world. And I'm not saying that's going to stop, but I think actually in some ways, the biggest issue that Israel's going to need to grapple with moving forward is actually going to be the hatred, demonization, and attempt to isolate Israel from a Western world that refuses to face the truth of the matter and instead blame Israel for all the problems that lie at the door of Israel's enemies, including the suffering of innocents in Gaza. I want to read you the words of Melanie Phillips talking about this worldwide frenzy. She said, over the past few days, anti-Israel and anti-Jewish feeling has been ratcheted into an absolute frenzy. Every few hours seems to bring a fresh outrage. In London, a prominent Jewish broadcaster was chased down the street by a man screaming, "Fascist Zionist scum." A woman dining at a Jewish restaurant in the city was asked if she was a Jew and then had food thrown over her. On the Greek island of Rhodes, a mob armed with knives attacked a group of Jewish teenagers. About 50 French Jewish children also, returning from a summer camp in Spain, were thrown off a flight at Valencia airport after the children sang Hebrew songs, and their tour leader was arrested and thrown to the ground. The BBC's obsession with demonizing and delegitimizing Israel has reached pathological proportions. This week it gave pride of place on its flagship radio show Today to ever more twisted accusations and blood libels, casting Israel as an evil and murderous state, including the claim by a British surgeon working in Gaza that the IDF were playing a game in shooting Gazan boys in the food queues by targeting a different part of their body every day. It's sick. These lies. It's a blood libel. The broadcasting behemoth could scarcely contain its excitement as reporters and interviewees joined in chorusing that a reckoning was coming, with the imminent end of the war in Gaza, after which Israel's war crimes would be revealed, and that the case for declaring a Palestine state was therefore now overwhelming. This propaganda onslaught consists of three major libels: that the IDF is deliberately killing Gazans queuing for food, that Israel is starving Gazans to death, and that settler violence against Arabs is increasing in the disputed territories of Judea and Samaria. All three claims seek to turn Israel from being the target and victim of genocidal attack into a murderous criminal entity that doesn't deserve to survive. It's a propaganda onslaught mounted by Hamas acting in concert with its allies in the United Nations and the entire global humanitarian establishment, pumped out through a media megaphone and parroted by politicians who are either malevolent or clueless. A moment's thought suggests that to accuse the IDF of deliberately killing Gazans queuing for food is absurd. Since the Israelis helped set up and are policing the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, in order to deliver food and aid safely to these civilians, why should the IDF want to kill them? Where they have killed some Gazans near the aid points, this has been clearly an unintended result of the soldiers firing into the air to warn off these possibly Hamas-infiltrated crowds if they look like they're about to rush the Israeli troops. It's unbelievable. Everything Israel's criticised of, it is simply what Israel's trying to do in order to survive. But of course, that's unacceptable to the world. We'll be back to the video in a second, but before we do, I just wanted to share with you something really meaningful to me. You know, after October 7th, like so many of you, I kept asking myself, what can we do that actually helps? And then I discovered Beit Binyamin, a place in the holy city of Tzfat in Israel that gives healing and rest to Israel's heroes, IDF soldiers, bereaved families, displaced Israelis, people carrying the invisible scars of war. It was started by two parents, Jen and Rob, in memory of their son, Binyamin, who was killed in action in Gaza just after October 7th. Instead of just grieving, they built a sanctuary for others. They provide housing, therapy, emotional support, and a warm, healing environment that helps people feel human again. And here's the amazing part. You don't need to give thousands to make a real difference. For $200, you can give a soldier a full day of peace, real rest, spa treatments, good meals, and a quiet space to breathe. For $300, you can sponsor a retreat for someone recovering from trauma, or give a lone soldier, someone far from home, the gift of connection and care. It's not just about money, it's restoration, dignity, and hope. Click the link in the video description to help turn pain into purpose. Let's be part of their healing. Melanie continues, it is Hamas that has been deliberately killing hundreds of Gazans to prevent them from gaining food from the American-Israeli-run aid points, because it's been through stealing this aid for its own use that Hamas has remained in power. Very clever. In order to survive, it needs to have the aid distributed instead by its UN ally of Hamas, the UN. That's why, as part of ceasefire negotiations, Hamas is insisting that aid must be distributed by the world body and the Palestine Red Crescent Society. This week, the media published distressing pictures of skeletal children as evidence of starvation in Gaza. But the adults in these pictures were all conspicuously well fed. Is it likely that it's only Gaza's children who are being starved, while the adults are not? The Israelis say that these pictures, which have been regularly trotted out over the years, with the false claim that they represent Israeli brutality, are actually of children suffering from wasting diseases or inherited medical conditions. There may be increasing hunger in Gaza, but to blame Israel for this is grotesque. The World Health Organization director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has accused the Israelis of an aid blockade. This is totally untrue. The IDF aid division, Kogat, says that recently nearly 4,500 trucks entered the strip with supplies, including flour for bakeries and 2,500 tons of baby food and high-calorie special food for children. The key point, however, is that 950 trucks have been stuck inside Gaza because the UN and its agencies are refusing to distribute the food and other aid they are carrying. The GHF has implored the global agency to help distribute these supplies around the strip, but the UN has refused. That's because it's working hand in glove with Hamas, which is determined to cause deaths from starvation as a weapon of war, just as it's used Gaza's civilians as human shield and cannon fodder. This hideous strategy rests on the infernal calculation that the more Gazans who die, the more the West will blame Israel. So, the West's baseless virtue signalling against Israeli starvation, quote-unquote, will in fact become the Gazans' death warrant. Now, the Israel delegitimization machine has created another potent weapon in its arsenal: settler violence. This demonizes Jewish residents of Judea and Samaria with the charge that they attack and terrorize their Arab neighbors. As ever, the opposite is mostly the case. True, a minority of hilltop Jewish youth have acted in revenge and committed unprovoked attacks against local Arabs, and they should be dealt with. But the vast majority of the violence in these territories is by local Arabs against Jewish residents, who suffer from such murderous attacks almost every day. According to a report by the NGO Regavim, 90% of incidents that the UN has classified as settler violence were nothing of the kind. These cases included clashes between Arabs and the IDF, where Jews acted in self-defense against Arab attacks. Again, guilty of self-defense. That's what the Jews are accused of every time if you dig into it deep enough. Or even peaceful activities by these Jews, such as supervised visits to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and to historic sites by hikers and tourists. These were counted as settler violence incidents. This week it was revealed that the claim that settlers had torched the Byzantine Church of St. George in Tabor near Ramallah was a lie. US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, who had toured the church and said desecrating a church, mosque or synagogue is a crime against humanity and God, walks that back and acknowledged that the church was undamaged, as was always entirely obvious from its intact stone walls. Yet this false claim made by priests and activists had ricocheted around the world. Now, by the way, I would add that you know that in previous wars that Israel's fought for its existence, 48-67, synagogues were damaged and destroyed. In fact, even in this war in Gaza, I'm desperately sad to share, and I'm sure many of you will know, the IDF have killed their own soldiers in friendly fire accidents. People should understand that accidents occur in war. The Jewish people do, Israelis do, and they forgive the IDF when our own sites or our own people get hurt. But when Israel, there's a claim that a church may have been accidentally touched in a bit of inadvertent shrapnel, and yet it's disgraceful what Israel's done. It's really quite sick. It's quite sick. It's a standard that we would never hold to another army fighting for its existence against a genocidal death cult enemy like Hamas. Melanie Phillips continues, instead of setting the record straight to help Israel defeat these Islamist enemies of humanity, and to protect diaspora Jews from the hatred incited by this media onslaught, political leaders in Britain and Europe have been pouring more fuel onto the flames. A statement by Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the foreign ministers of 27 other countries accused Israel of, quote, the inhumane killing of civilians, including children, seeking to meet their most basic needs of water and food, denying essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population, and soaring rates of settler violence. How can we explain this astounding descent from rationality into the sewers of lethal propaganda? How can it be that in Britain, factual evidence about the Gaza war is met with incredulity, Zionist has become a term of abuse, and antisemitism is now regarded as little more than a device for Jews to sanitize the crimes of Israel? There are many reasons, including ideology, ignorance, and wishful thinking. There's also the widespread belief that the UN and humanitarian rights establishment, which have the status of a secular religion, act with perfect integrity and are incapable of lying or doing evil. You know, I was actually having a chat with someone recently about this. When you hear the word NGO, an NGO, it sounds so angelic and perfect. It's just human beings. Often NGOs can be the most corrupt organisations on the planet. Yet we attribute to them the UN, the International Court of Justice. We attribute to them so much status and morality. It's something that we really need to reflect on. Melanie concludes by saying there are far darker impulses at work. The deep desire to prove that the Jews are bad, that they have a unique and destructive power over world events, that they can never be victims. That's why the acute threats to the world posed by Russia, China or Iran, the terrible atrocities against the Druze in Syria or the Christians in Africa, the famine and starvation in Sudan, all are dwarfed in the West by its overwhelming, unhinged, vicious obsession with tiny Israel, the focus of a civilizational disorder that is dragging down not the Jewish state, but the West itself. And, it really is the case that the Western obsession with Israel and Israel's actions, despite it behaving honorably and fighting a just war, an existential war for survival, and yet the West obsesses over it, ignoring far deadlier and bloody conflicts around the world. The only way you can make sense of it is to understand it's because it's a Jewish state. It's the Jews. And as I said, my concern, or what I see coming down the tracks, is actually less about Israel and the Arabs, but Israel and the West coming to loggerheads. The West turning on Israel because of their twisted, perverted narrative, their moral inversion of who is right and who is wrong in this war. And I just did the most remarkable interview, which we just released on JTV, and we put the full unedited version with the bonus section on JTV Plus. And it's with a Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, about the end times prophecy according to Torah. And he revealed to me that actually Torah prophecy, the Talmudic sages, the rabbis of old, predicted that the end times war was actually going to be between Israel and the Western nations. Incredible. Have a watch of the trailer.
The war that's predicted will be the Western nations attacking us, using the Arab peoples as the point of attack. Very interesting. One well-known prediction is that there will be a 12-minute war that will precede the Messianic era. Now you can imagine someone in the 1700s writing about an international 12-minute war. That must have sounded like, a misprint if there ever was one. Of course, today that's not inconceivable at all. We have all the indications that we are in the pre-Messianic era, and also the predicted events that need to take place to qualify or diagnose us as being in that era are all in place. Jews returning to Israel, for example, the land flourishing with the return of the Jews. Many things that we know are in place.
Rabbi, are we in what they call the end times? To watch the full unedited interview and access a whole new range of premium content, click on the link in the video description.